The house rested like a forgotten relic at the edge of the Wyoming plains, its slanted roof bending beneath the weight of time, its porch groaning with every gust of prairie wind. Weather had peeled away the paint, and long, curling strips and vines curled like veins around the posts. From a distance, the house looked abandoned. Up close, it looked patient. Inside lived Walter Greene, though lived was perhaps too generous a word for it. He moved through the house like a shadow passing across old wallpaper. His routine was both survival and penance. Wake at dawn. Boil water, never coffee. Feed the birds, though he no longer named them. Sit by the porch and write in a journal whose pages remained largely empty. He had once believed in words. Now he believed in silence. In the narrow bedroom, a wooden wardrobe stood sentinel. Inside it hung a single jacket, his old firefighter's coat, once stiff with pride, now limp with disuse. Each morning, Walter would lift it out, press it against his chest, and then stop. The gesture never changed, nor did its futility. The jacket no longer fit. It hadn't in years, not since the tumor had begun to rise on his back like an unwanted mountain, distorting his silhouette, his posture, his past. The tumor had arrived slowly, silently. First a twinge, then a swelling, then an intrusion. Eventually, it had claimed the whole architecture of his life. Not just his body, but how he moved, how he was seen, or rather, how he wasn't. The mirror in the hallway had long since been turned to face the wall. Walter never smashed it. He simply stopped asking it for answers. Outside, the town of Larkspur moved on without him. They remembered him vaguely like a faded photograph in a dusty album. Some recalled the fire on Main Street and how he had pulled 3 children from a collapsing roof. Others whispered that he had gone mad after his wife died, or that he had become disfigured by some illness he refused to treat. Children invented names. The Hunch, the Mountain Man, the Crooked Ghost. Their imaginations did what the town's compassion could not. Walter did not care. Or, rather, he had taught himself not to. One morning in early June, as the sun barely touched the fields, Walter noticed movement through the lace curtain of his kitchen window. A young woman crouched in the tall grass with a camera. She was perhaps in her 20s, wearing a canvas coat too warm for the season. Her camera was not a phone, but a real one, bulky with a lens that gleamed in the soft light. She returned the next day, and the next. Always at different hours, always alone. Sometimes she pointed her camera toward the distant fence line, sometimes at the birds, but never not once at the house. He watched her through the curtain, at first with suspicion, then with curiosity. There was something different in how she moved, how she looked, not with hunger or pity, but with stillness, as if she were listening to the land. On the 5th day she approached the porch but did not knock. Instead, she left something on the top step, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper tied with string. Walter waited until she disappeared from view before retrieving it. Inside was a vintage film camera. Next to it, a folded note in looping cursive. "If no one ever sees you, how do you know you're still here?" He placed the camera on the table and stared at it for a long time. It sat there like a question, and he had no immediate answer. The next morning he still hadn't touched it. By the 3rd day, the camera had become part of the room, a silent presence. That afternoon he walked into the hallway, stood before the mirror he hadn't faced in years, and turned it around. He lifted the camera. Click. The shutter sounded like thunder in a mausoleum. He didn't develop the photo right away. He wanted time, wanted space. But something had broken open. That night, he sat by the window with his journal and wrote, "I saw myself today. I expected horror. Instead, I felt nothing. Is that better or worse?" Later that week, the woman returned. She placed a second envelope on the porch. This time it bore her name, Emily Carter, photography student, Columbia University. Her project, Portraits of Silence. She left no further instructions. Just her presence and her patience. So, Walter responded in kind. He developed the photo, his own back curved and burdened. A body no longer symmetrical, no longer dignified in the ways the world expected. He placed it in a plain envelope and left it where she had stood. The next day, she came and took it. No words, no notes. Then came the exchanges. She would leave film rolls, and he would use them not to photograph beauty, but truth. He captured cracked floorboards, the soft rot of fruit, a moth dying on the window screen. And eventually, he captured himself again, this time from different angles, always alone, always half-lit. One evening, after a day of wind, Walter placed a final image on the porch, a full shot of his back, the tumor clear, the lighting soft but unflinching. No filters, no edits. The next morning, the photograph was gone. In its place, Emily had left a note. "This image deserves to be seen. Not because it is tragic, because it is real. May I show them?" Walter stood on the porch, the wind tugging at the corners of the paper. He read the note again, then looked toward the horizon where the sun burned low like an ember. He said nothing, but that evening he did something he hadn't done in 2 decades. He opened the wardrobe, took out the old jacket, and, without trying it on, laid it gently across the porch rail. Emily understood. A few days later, he received a letter from her, long typed, full of intent. She planned to include his image in a student gallery exhibit titled "The Weight of Silence." She promised to protect his name, his dignity, his right to disappear again if he chose to. He did not write back, but in the following days he felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not release. Something quieter, a soft exhale after a long-held breath. One morning, weeks later, he opened the mirror door again and didn't flinch. His body was as it had always been, wounded, curved strange, but he was there, present, not invisible. And for the first time in years, he whispered out loud to no one, "I am still here, and oh, I did it. If you've made it this far, thank you." Stories like Walter's are rarely loud, but they matter. Subscribe to our channel to follow more journeys like this, where silence finds voice and healing begins in the shadows. She arrived in Wyoming carrying more weight than her suitcase could hold. Emily Carter had always been drawn to silence. Not the empty kind that suffocates a room, but the living silence that breathes between words, between people, between all the things left unsaid. It fascinated her how people buried their truths not in loud outbursts, but in quiet gestures. How the most haunted faces smiled the widest. She was 24, fresh from the density of Manhattan's skyline, where everything screamed for attention and no one really looked. New York had been home, but only in name. Her world had been the university lecture halls, gallery walls, critiques softened with cold praise and the ever-turning gears of competition. Everyone was trying to be louder than everyone else, but Emily had never wanted to shout. She wanted to see. Her thesis project was born in the waiting room of a hospice center months before her arrival in Larkspur. She had been visiting a distant aunt, a woman she hardly knew, whose body was withering away from within. During one visit, Emily sat quietly in the corner, camera resting in her lap, too shy to photograph, too numb to speak. In the far seat, an old man with eyes like river stones stared out the window. He hadn't spoken all week, the nurse told her, not since his wife passed. Emily had taken one photograph. Just one. It was the man's hands knotted, still resting on his knees as if holding something invisible. When she developed it later that week, the image seemed to hum with something unspoken. That single frame whispered more than a gallery full of staged portraits. And so, Portraits of Silence was born. She pitched it to her advisor, a photo essay exploring the invisible stories of people who lived in the margins of sight. Those overlooked, passed by, faded into the edges of life. She would travel to forgotten places, towns bypassed by time, and simply listen. That's how she found Larkspur. It wasn't on any list of artistic interest. It wasn't picturesque in a way that postcards adore, but there was something honest about it. The cracked sidewalks, the sun-bleached barns, the wind that seemed to murmur names in the wheat fields. Emily rented a small room above an antique shop and began wandering. She kept her camera close, but her curiosity closer. She wasn't hunting for tragedy. She was searching for stories that had fallen asleep in people's bones. That's when she saw him. It was early morning dew still clinging to the tall grass when she noticed the slumped figure tending to tomatoes in the yard of a gray house near the edge of town. He moved with difficulty but with intention, slow, steady. There was something curved about him, something unusual in the way his frame bent as if gravity had played a cruel joke. She didn't aim her lens at him. Instead, she knelt to photograph a thistle catching sunlight. But her gaze returned again and again, to the house, the figure, the silence that hovered around it like weather. She asked the woman at the diner who lived there. Walter Greene. The woman had said, drying a coffee cup without looking up. Used to be a firefighter. Lives alone. Doesn't like visitors. That was all she got. Emily returned anyway. Not to intrude, but to remain nearby. Each day she walked past, sometimes stopping to sketch shadows in her notebook or capture the angle of light on broken shingles. She wasn't sure what drew her back. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't fascination in the way photographers sometimes become voyeurs. It was recognition. She too knew what it meant to disappear while standing in plain sight. At the age of 15, Emily had stopped speaking for nearly 3 months. After her older brother's accident, after the funeral, after the visitors stopped coming, and the house settled into a silence heavy enough to crack the floorboards, she found herself unable to form sentences. Not because she lacked words, but because every word felt insufficient. People called it a phase, a trauma response. They said she would grow through it. She never told them the truth. Silence had felt more honest than language. She recovered eventually, found new ways to speak through photography, through light and shadow and frame. But she never forgot the feeling of being seen as strange, broken, inconvenient. She never forgot how loud the world became when you had nothing to say. So when she left the camera on Walter's porch, it wasn't a challenge. It was an offering. She didn't expect a response. But he answered. The envelope appeared like a whisper. Inside a photograph. Grainy, stark, a man's back curved not by time but by something deeper, grief perhaps, or punishment. She studied the image for hours. Not because of the deformity but because of the dignity. The photograph did not beg for sympathy. It demanded presence. It said, "I am still here. Look, but do not turn away." Emily was shaken, not in horror, but in humility. For the first time since beginning her project, she hesitated. She had always thought her role was to reveal, to give voice. But Walter didn't need a voice. He needed space. He needed respect. And still, she knew this image was important, not for spectacle, but for truth. She left a note. She chose her words carefully. This deserves to be seen. Not because it is tragic, because it is real. And then she waited. The next day the camera was still there, but beside it lay his jacket, clean folded, placed gently on the porch railing. She understood immediately. It was his story now, shared but not surrendered. That night she wrote in her own journal, "The lens reveals only what is allowed. Trust is the real light." In the following days, she visited other parts of Larkspur, an old widow who kept her late husband's shoes lined up at the door, a boy who built sculptures out of rusted tools in the back of a shed, a former librarian who spoke only in poems, but none stayed with her the way Walter did. His silence had shape. It had contour and edges. It had permission. And in that silence, Emily began to understand her own. She had never set out to heal anyone. She wasn't a therapist or a savior. She simply wanted to see and to help others see what they'd been trained to overlook. On the day she left Larkspur to return briefly to New York for the gallery exhibit, she passed by Walter's house one final time. The porch was empty, the curtain still drawn. But as the wind moved through the fields, she caught sight of something in the upstairs window, a camera lens reflecting the sky. He was watching, not hiding, not fleeing, watching. Some stories don't begin with words. They begin with stillness. If you're moved by silence, by presence, by truth, subscribe to our channel. The quietest voices often echo the loudest. There are wounds that don't bleed. They do not scab over or bruise. They do not leave scars in the places people expect to find them. Instead, they lodge themselves in the folds of memory in the pauses between breath and heartbeat, and there they remain alive, pulsing quietly beneath the surface. Walter Greene carried such a wound. After Emily left Larkspur for the gallery opening, the days folded back into silence. But it was no longer the same silence he had once clung to like a shroud. It had changed shape, no longer a hiding place, but a mirror, and Walter had never been good with mirrors. He had always told himself he withdrew because of the tumor, because of the way his body had betrayed him, because of the stares and the murmurs and the cruel nicknames. But deep inside he knew better. He had chosen to disappear long before his back began to swell. The memory came without warning, fragmented like a film reel missing frames. He was back in the kitchen 17 years ago. The air smelled like burnt toast and rain. Margaret was at the table, thin her scarf hiding what illness had stolen. She had just received another letter from the hospital, a denial. The surgery Walter needed was too expensive, too risky. They had tried. She had tried. He remembered her voice soft like twilight. "I just want to see you stand tall again." But he had laughed. Not kindly, the kind of laughter that builds walls. "There's no fixing this. Let's not pretend." She didn't argue. That wasn't her way. But he had seen the way her fingers tightened around the ceramic mug, how her gaze dropped to the floor as if searching for something that had slipped out of reach. She died 3 months later. Walter never visited her grave. He told himself that remembering her in silence was enough. That grief was private, that pain was not something to parade under the sun. But the truth was he had not gone because he couldn't bear to be seen not by her memory, and certainly not by the community that had once praised him as a hero. He had once been Larkspur's pride, the firefighter who dove into flames, the man who saved 3 children from a burning house, the husband who always brought home fresh-cut flowers. And then slowly he had become something else. The bent shadow. The man who limped and winced. The man who no longer made eye contact. He remembered the first time a child stared too long, how his mother had pulled him away, whispering something sharp under her breath. That night, Walter turned the hallway mirror to face the wall, not out of fear, out of shame. But Emily's photographs had stirred something too long dormant, especially the last one, the self-portrait he left on the porch. It wasn't just an image, it was a confession, and now it would be seen. He told himself it didn't matter, that he had nothing to lose, that anonymity had already been stripped from him years ago. But the truth gnawed at him in the early hours when the world was most honest. He feared being known, not for what he had become, but for what he had failed to be. The night before the gallery, he couldn't sleep. He walked through the house barefoot, trailing fingers along dusty furniture. In the attic, he found a box of Margaret's things, letters, books, the scarf she had worn every day in her final months, and tucked inside an envelope yellowed with time, a note he had never read. It was addressed to Dr. Samuel Ryan, a renowned spinal specialist from Denver. It was Margaret's handwriting. "Dear Dr. Ryan, I know my husband will not write to you. He believes he is beyond help, but I don't. I still see the man who ran into fire, the man who laughed until he cried. If you can help him even a little, please let us know. Even if he refuses, I'll be the one to convince him. He won't stay broken forever. I believe that." The letter was never sent. A date was scribbled in the corner, 3 days before her final breath. Walter pressed the paper to his chest and wept, not loudly, not dramatically, but the way old men cry when no one is looking. His shoulders shook. The weight on his back never felt heavier. The next morning he walked to the porch and stood in the early light. For the first time he let the sun touch his skin without flinching. He didn't feel worthy of forgiveness, but he felt something adjacent, something softer. He imagined Margaret sitting beside him sipping tea. "You let them see you," she might say, and he would answer yes, finally. That afternoon he received a letter from Emily. Inside was a photograph of the gallery wall. There, mounted in black and white, his portrait, the curve of his back, the honesty of shadow, the soft edge of shame turned into strength. Beneath it a single word, Walter. No title, no caption, no pity, just a name. Emily wrote that people stood quietly in front of it. Some cried. Some left small notes on the table nearby. One visitor wrote, "This is the most human thing I've ever seen." She ended the letter with a line that caught his breath. "You've helped others be seen simply by allowing yourself to be." Walter closed his eyes. For the first time in years he felt the shame begin to recede, not vanish but loosen like a knot untangling slowly. He retrieved the firefighter's jacket from the closet. Still stiff, still a relic. He didn't try to wear it. Instead, he placed it gently on the armchair by the window and sat across from it. He poured 2 cups of tea. One for him, one for the man he used to be. And together in silence they watched the evening settle over Larkspur. Kick. Every story of shame carries within it the possibility of grace. If Walter's story has moved you, stay with us. Subscribe to our channel for more journeys where silence becomes strength. It wasn't the photograph that startled them, it was the stillness in it. At the Columbia Student Gallery in downtown Manhattan, amid bold colors and abstract experiments, one image stopped people in their tracks. It was quiet, stark, black and white. A man's back hunched, sculpted by an unseen weight. His skin was weathered, the curvature unnatural, and yet there was nothing pitiful in the frame, only presence. Beneath the portrait a single word, Walter. No title, no plea, no context, just identity. Emily had worried it might be too intimate, too raw, but it was the image that visitors returned to again and again, their footsteps softening as they approached. Some didn't say a word. Some whispered as if in the presence of something sacred. A few cried openly. By the end of the evening, the comment table beside the frame was filled with handwritten notes. "I see my father in this. I have a body that's hard to carry too. Thank you for showing this. It gave me courage." Emily gathered the notes, folded them carefully, and placed them in an envelope addressed to Larkspur, Wyoming. But before it arrived, Walter felt the shift. It began with a knock. A boy no older than 7 stood on his porch holding a drawing. It was crayon on folded paper, a mountain with arms, a curved figure holding a small flame. "This is you," the boy said simply, and placed the paper on the step. He didn't wait for thanks. He just smiled and walked away. Walter sat down slowly, opened the paper again. The mountain man in the child's art was not frightening. He was radiant. The next day, a woman from town left a covered dish of sweet potatoes on the porch. The day after that, someone else left a loaf of homemade bread. And then a letter arrived from Emily with the comments and a photograph of his portrait on the gallery wall. Walter read each message one by one. His hands trembled not from illness but from something more elusive, the unexpected weight of being witnessed without judgment. Then came the letter that broke the cycle of soft gestures. It was from a man named Dr. Samuel Ryan. The envelope was formal, but the words were not. Mr. Greene. "My name is Dr. Samuel Ryan. I saw your portrait. I did not expect to be moved the way I was. I specialize in complex spinal reconstruction and benign tumor removal. But more than that, I was once a soldier, and I know what it means to disappear into pain. If you are willing, I would like to come to Larkspur and meet you, not as a doctor, as someone who sees you." Walter read the letter 5 times, then again that night under lamplight. The offer was not salvation, it was not forced, but it was sincere. He didn't know how to answer. Instead, he walked to the closet, opened it, and stared at the firefighter's jacket hanging inside. His reflection caught in the wardrobe mirror ghost-like, not just from his back, but from the old habit of averting his own gaze. He remembered something Margaret once told him long ago, before the tumor, before the silence. Sometimes people don't need to be saved. They just need someone to sit with them until the dark passes. Was this that kind of moment? 3 days later, Dr. Ryan arrived. He was younger than Walter expected, early 50s, eyes like Riverstone's blue, steady, gentle. He wore no white coat, brought no clipboard. only a camera phone in one hand and a box of lemon scones in the other. They didn't speak at first. Walter gestured to the porch. They sat. Wind whispered across the yard. A hawk circled above. Finally, Dr. Ryan said softly, "Thank you for letting me see you." Walter nodded. Then silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full. Dr. Ryan stayed an hour. He did not examine Walter. He told stories instead, about other patients, about his time in the army, about his belief that every human being deserved to stand in their own skin without apology. Before he left, he handed Walter a single sheet of paper. "If you ever want to consider surgery, I've listed everything here. But if not, that's okay too. You owe nothing. You've already given more than you know." After he left, Walter sat for a long time. The paper in his hand felt heavier than it should have, not from the weight of information, but from possibility. That evening, he walked to the mirror in the hallway. He turned it upright again. He looked at himself, not just the hump, not just the brokenness. He saw the boy who ran barefoot through fields, the young man who fell in love, the husband who had held his wife's hand as she faded, the firefighter who had once charged into fire, not knowing if he would return. He saw the man he still was. And for the first time he whispered, not out of pain but clarity, "I am worth the light." If Walter's journey speaks to you, you're not alone. Let the quiet voices rise. Let your own story find breath. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage in unlikely places. The night before the surgery, Walter Greene didn't sleep. He sat in the wooden armchair by the window wrapped in a flannel blanket older than the porch outside. The wind sighed through the trees, and every now and then a branch would knock gently against the glass like memory asking to be let in. His bag was packed. Not much. A change of clothes, a paperback novel he would never finish, a photo of Margaret taken before illness hollowed her cheeks. He tucked the letter she had written to Dr. Ryan into the front pocket of his shirt close to his heart. It felt like a secret he wasn't ready to share and yet couldn't afford to keep buried. The house felt different that evening. Not in appearance, but in weight. Every object he passed, framed photographs, chipped teacups, dust-covered books, seemed to lean slightly toward him as if bearing witness. He turned the hallway mirror to face him again. He studied the shape of his back. The tumor arched like a second spine, monstrous yet familiar. It had been with him so long it almost felt like a part of his identity. A companion. A punishment. A shield. He whispered into the mirror, not to himself, but to the fear behind his eyes. "You are not all of me." At dawn, Emily arrived to drive him to the hospital. She didn't ask how he felt. She didn't say it would be okay. She simply opened the passenger door and waited. That was all Walter needed. The drive to Denver was long and quiet. The radio remained off. The landscape unrolled outside the window like a fading memory, flat plains, sun-soaked hills, fences half swallowed by grass. Walter kept his eyes open. He wanted to memorize the shape of everything just in case. Hospitals had always unsettled him, not for their sterility, but for their vulnerability. Everyone who walked in left a piece of themselves behind blood-breath uncertainty. Dr. Ryan greeted them in the atrium. He wasn't in scrubs yet, just his usual denim shirt and quiet presence. "There's no rush," he said. "You set the pace." Walter nodded. His heart was loud in his chest. The pre-surgery rituals unfolded like a dance. Vitals, checked signatures, signed questions, asked, IVs inserted. A nurse named Marissa placed a hand gently on his shoulder before wheeling him down the hallway. "I'll be right here when you wake up," Emily said, her voice soft behind him. As the doors swung open and the lights above blurred into streaks, Walter closed his eyes and descended not into sleep, but into memory. He was back in the burning house on 6th and Clover, the one that had changed everything. Smoke clawed at his throat, but he moved through it like a phantom. In the nursery, a crib. A child crying. He scooped her into his arms, turned, and fire swallowed the doorway. He had leapt through a window. That moment, the impact, the trauma had lingered not just in his body, but in his cells. He had never blamed the fire. Only the silence afterward. Then another memory emerged, quieter, crueler. Margaret in bed, thin and glowing. She was smiling. Always smiling, even when dying. "You're more than what hurts," she had once told him. He wanted to believe her. Even now. The anesthesia took hold like fog rolling over water. The lights above flickered once, then faded. Blackness. 6 hours later, he returned. Groggy, aching, stitched. He woke to beeping, to white sheets, to a dull raw pain where the tumor had been. But something was missing. The weight. The old familiar pressure between his shoulders gone, replaced by emptiness and thread. Dr. Ryan stood nearby, a clipboard in hand, but not looking at it. He was watching Walter's face, searching for something deeper than clinical response. "It's out," he said simply. Walter didn't speak. His throat was dry. His heart was not. Later that night, alone in the hospital room, Walter asked for a mirror. The nurse hesitated, then returned with a small hand mirror, the kind used for shaving. Walter took it with both hands, turned his back to the bathroom mirror, and adjusted the angle. He braced himself. What he saw made his breath catch. A scar curved across his shoulder blades like a river carved into earth. Swollen, red healing. The space where the tumor had been now looked strange in its absence, flat, exposed, foreign. He stared at it for a long time, not out of fear, not revulsion, but awe. He whispered not to the mirror this time, but to the empty space where the weight had once lived. "You're gone." And then to himself, "And I'm still here." He closed the mirror, set it down, and cried, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of lightness. The next morning, Emily returned with a surprise. It was a framed photograph taken months ago before anything began. It showed Walter's porch in winter, the jacket hung on the railing, snow gently falling around it. It was a picture of stillness, of waiting. Walter looked at it, then at Emily. He didn't speak. He smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, not performative, but honest. A small upward motion that meant more than words could carry. Sometimes the bravest thing is not facing death, but choosing to live again after surviving. If this moment speaks to you, join us. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where healing begins with one breath, one step, one choice. It took nearly a month for the scar to fade into memory. Walter Greene moved slowly during those early days back in Larkspur, not from pain, but from unfamiliarity. For the first time in decades, his steps were not shaped by avoidance. There was no longer the weight behind him to justify the lowered eyes, the hunched posture, the invisibility. Instead, there was light, not a sudden spotlight or an epiphany wrapped in applause. Just soft, consistent light falling through windows, warming floorboards, tracing the grooves of his face each morning as he stood by the sink and let it settle into his skin. Walter had expected to feel changed. What he hadn't expected was how much he had stayed the same. He still woke before dawn, still made tea, still swept the porch, though now with a little more rhythm in his gait, but the silence inside him no longer echoed. It hummed. The house felt different too. It wasn't the creaks or the shadows, but the openness of it, as if each room, long folded in on itself, had exhaled. He had reopened the mirror in the hallway permanently, not out of vanity, but as an act of quiet defiance. Each time he passed, he nodded at the man he saw there. Not for recognition, for affirmation. "You stayed," he sometimes whispered. "You made it." Letters continued to arrive. One from a mother in Nebraska whose daughter had scoliosis and carried shame like armor. One from a young artist in New Mexico who had painted Walter's portrait from memory after seeing Emily's exhibit. One from a man in Oregon who simply wrote, "I needed this. Thank you." Walter read them slowly, then reread them, not to relive praise, but to understand the reach of presence. He had never wanted to be a symbol. He had only wanted to disappear without consequence. And yet, by allowing himself to be seen, he had become something he never intended, a mirror for others. Emily returned in early fall just as the leaves along Main Street began their descent into amber. She wore a cardigan and carried a camera, but this time her lens stayed in the bag. "I came to ask for a favor," she said as they sat on the porch sipping black tea. "It's my turn now." She unfolded a proposal, an idea they had once tiptoed around but never spoken aloud. A traveling exhibit. Not about deformity or tragedy, but about those who lived unseen. The janitors, the caregivers, the wanderers, the elderly who sat by windows day after day, hoping to be remembered. "I want to call it Those We Never Saw," she said. Walter didn't hesitate. "I'll help." They began quietly. Walter would walk the town with his camera gifted by Emily restored and reel and capture people in moments they didn't think anyone noticed. A woman folding laundry by an open window. An old man carving birdhouses in a shed. A teenager staring into a cracked mirror behind a gas station. He never intruded. He asked permission afterward, and no one said no. Because Walter no longer asked with fear in his voice. He asked with presence. The first photo he submitted for the new exhibit was a self-portrait. Not of his face, not of his back, just his hands holding a cup of tea sunlight slipping over his knuckles, a soft tremble still lingering in the fingertips. Below the image, a small caption, "I am still here." By winter, the first gallery opened in Cheyenne, then Portland, and then Chicago. Walter never attended the shows. He didn't need to. His presence was already there, framed in stillness, anchored in story. One morning, a schoolteacher from Larkspur stopped him in the grocery aisle. "My son talks about you," she said. "He said you're the reason he started drawing again. He calls you the Mountain Man." Walter chuckled. "I used to hate that name." The teacher smiled. "Now, he says mountains don't move, but they make others climb higher." That evening, Walter stood by the open window. Snow fell softly outside. The wind carried the distant laughter of children walking home from the library. On the table beside him sat the firefighter's jacket, folded, worn, respected, not forgotten. He reached for his journal, opened to a blank page, and wrote, "There are many ways to be brave. I learned the quiet ones last." He paused, then added, "Light didn't save me. It just waited until I was ready to return to it." Turned. For all who carry unseen burdens, for all who've spent years in silence, your story is not over. Let this be your sign. Subscribe to our channel to find more journeys like Walter's and perhaps begin your own.